Hello, everyone, and welcome. Christmas is almost upon us, and what says a holiday season better than twinkle lights? Today, I wanted to share an older recording with you that is just so near and dear to my heart. I hope you enjoy the show, and I hope you apply this effect to your own coloring. There are several new pages in my Etsy store that feature Christmas wreaths, so you have plenty of opportunity to practice. Additionally, there are gift pages in my community and in my academy. For this demo, I drew a Christmas wreath for us to play with and divided it in half so that I can play with two different coloring techniques. I will color the left side of the drawing with pencils and the right side with watercolor paints. You will find that while the result may appear very similar, the approach is quite different. And since I'm working on tan-toned paper, I will need white pigment for my glow effect. Let's get started! The first thing I do is establish all the elements of my drawing that I want to glow in the end, and that's all the little bulbs. I fill them in with white charcoal, habit, but I immediately notice that while it does give me a nice white pigment, the white charcoal doesn't actually completely cover the outlines. And I definitely want these outlines gone entirely for this effect to work. So I switched to a gel pen, much better. With a white gel pen, I now have pure white bulbs and no outlines. If you're working on white paper, your bulbs are already white, but you still need to find a way to get rid of the black outlines. Gel pen, whiteout, acrylic paint, there are options. Now I add more white highlights to the other objects that I know will have light reflections in them, like the glass sugar skulls. And also to the objects that I know will be light in color, like my white mouse. Here I'm using a Q-tip to blend the highlights and also to blend the white of the fur. Notice that even though right now I only have white pigment on my page, the white of the bulbs is already the strongest white. To make things fun and festive though, I want my Christmas lights to be colorful. Here's a fun trick. Instead of coloring the bulbs with a certain color, use a desired color around the bulb, while keeping the glass bit white. Remember, white is as bright as we can get, so filling in the bulbs with colors will weaken that glow illusion. See how the pure white centers contrasted against the brightly colored halos already look shiny? Neat, right? Now for that high contrast bit. I imagine this wreath is made out of dark green branches, but I know that green pine needles will be very well lit near the bulbs as well. So I'm adding dark green all over, leaving just the areas around the glow effects uncolored. Now this next part is very important. I switched to a light green. I use it as a blender to establish the gradient between colorful lights and the darkness in the branches. I'm also using this color to add some more definition to the pine needles. Working with Prismacolor pencils, I'm able to use a lighter color on top of a darker one, almost as I would with pastels. That's one of the main reasons that I like this brand so much. If you're working with something that doesn't allow for lighter color to be used on top of darker one, make sure to place your dark shadows carefully. Or you can start with light green and then add the darker parts. Experiment and play with what you have. See what works best with your materials while following the concepts that I'm showing you. I want my contrast to be really high, so I'm actually adding deep purple to the darker parts of the branches. Now for the other ornaments. This part is a lot of fun, but it's going to be specific to each colorist. Pick fun colors, cool textures, and go crazy. The basic premise for these red spheres is that you want more bright red pigment in the center, and lighter colors and white reflections closer to the edge. In this case though, we have a new element to consider. We now also have glowing lights. So I want to make sure to use the corresponding light color in the reflections. Here we have a yellow bulb, so I'm adding a little bit of yellow to the red ornaments as well. Actually, now that I look at it, I have quite a bit more yellow bulbs than I have any other colors. So I imagine that the whole wreath will be somewhat lit in yellow glow. So I'm adding yellow highlights to all of my ornaments. This achieves two things. One, it introduces that soft yellow glow, and two, it eliminates most of the white highlights, leaving only the bulb's pure white. Remember, that helps with the glow illusion. When it comes to my white mouse, I also want colorful lights reflected on the fur. Because this fur is white, the colors will remain pretty pure. Yellow light will actually look yellow on the mouse. For the ribbon, I established the base red, and then I add a light peach color to the parts that are twisting and bulging, making my ribbon more three-dimensional and textured. Deep purple for the shadows, and to stay consistent with my soft yellow lighting, I go over the whole thing with a light coat of yellow ochre. Looks great, but I think I can make it look even more sparkly. Let's add some small twinkle lights and glitter effects to the branches. This is something that's best done as the last element, with a white gel pen or white acrylic paint. I'm working with a gel pen, and I need to work fast before it dries. I make little cross marks and I smudge off the edges with my Q-tip for that twinkle light look. Make sure that if you add these little starbursts, that your lines are all consistent and parallel all over the composition. Mine are all vertical with horizontal cross pieces. Yours may be slanted, but make sure that they all slant in the same direction. These are technically optical illusions. The light bends in a certain way on the surface of your lens, whether it's your camera lens or the lens of your eye, and creates these starburst effects. But it bends consistently for all the similar light sources. Now I add some randomly scattered white dots of various sizes, and that's my glitter effect. If you want to emphasize the glow of the bulbs even more, you can play with adding a darker background to your composition. I'm pretty happy with the tan as my background, though I've never really been a background person anyway, especially with pencil coloring. I'm more interested in the subject details, and I'm eager to start on the other side. Watercolor. Now, when working with watercolor, everything's backwards. Remember that with pencils, I usually start with white and then build up my colors. With watercolors, I have to start with the darkest parts and plan to leave the lightest parts light or uncolored. With watercolor, you can only go darker, so you need to work carefully and you need to plan carefully. Thankfully, I have a reference image on the left side of my coloring already, so I have an idea of where I want the darkest parts of the pine needles to be. The way that I like to work with this medium is I add a little bit of water to a small area of the paper, and then I add a dab of color to that part, kind of spreading it around with my brush gently. That makes for a very cool soft gradient effect. Watercolors are not precise. They can be, but I find that their beauty is mostly in that sloppy, careless application. There's a lot of randomness here. It's like a tie-dye t-shirt. You kind of know how your design will turn out, but the exact details are always a surprise. For my colors, I'm using only a basic green and a touch of blue for the darker parts. And I'm letting the water do the rest. The colors just blend nicely on their own. My watercolor set consists just of the main colors. It's not like my Prismacolor pencil set that has 16 shades of green to choose from. But this isn't a setback. In fact, I prefer it this way. With just a basic selection of colors, I control their tints, tones, and shades with either the amount of water that I'm using for the lighter tints, or by adding a little bit of black and blue to the darker tones and shades. I have all the colors that I need to create any effect that I want. For instance, here I'm adding black and purple to the deepest parts of the branches. Now I'm adding my colorful glow effects around the bulbs. And since I'm working in watercolor, adding a background is suddenly an option. I decided to go with purple tones to make my yellow light stand out even more. The thing that I like the most about watercolor painting is how dreamy everything looks. That slightly fuzzy, out of focus feeling that you get is very serene. It's quite a change from pencil coloring, where everything has to be so precise. It's a lot faster too. I'm coloring the same areas probably 3 times faster than I was doing it with pencils. It's a cool little added bonus. As the watercolor paint dries on paper, it appears more dull, less saturated. So I'm going over the parts that I want to be brighter or darker with some extra layers of pigment. Adding is always an option with this medium. Subtracting, not so much. There is a small window of opportunity to remove some of the unwanted pigment with water just seconds after you apply the paint, but it only really works with small areas and generally on very light colors. I can't make this green any lighter than it is already, for instance. At least not with watercolor. But I can build up my pigment. I must say I enjoy coloring the glass ornaments with watercolor even more than I do with pencils. Watercolor just naturally creates this awesome pools of color that look like glass all on their own. Coloring the ribbon is very similar to pencils, except that I need to remember to keep the lighter parts light to begin with, and then add the red and the purple to my shadows. And now we come to the mouse and the lights. Traditionally, you would use watercolors on white paper, coloring everything except the white objects. But my paper is tan. Using this method, tan is as light as I can get. So, time to bend the rules a little bit. I paint the mouse with acrylic paint, adding the yellow light spilled from the Christmas lights. And for the lights themselves, I'm going back to my gel pen. I could also use acrylic paint for these, but I wanted to match the left side of my drawing. And to keep both halves balanced, I also add the twinkle lights here. Same exact way as before. Again, if you're doing a traditional watercolor painting, you should use the white of the paper and map out all the little areas that you need to leave white at the end. But why go through all that trouble when you can just use a white gel pen? I'm a huge fan of mixing media. Anything goes in the studio, as long as it gets me to the desired effect. So looking at the two halves of my wreath side by side, I did achieve a very similar effect on the pine needles. Same kind of yellow glow around the twinkle lights. The mice look almost identical, but the main difference is the overall feel of the coloring. It's like the same object was photographed with two different camera lenses. The one on the left, the colored pencil version, is sharper and in perfect focus. It looks like a postcard or a Norman Rockwell painting. It's a great look if that's what you're going for, but it may not always be desired. This is a clean and a highly polished illustration. Looking at the right half, we get the softer view of the same object, but it's a bit easier on the eyes and the brain. It's not in your face perfect and crisp like the pencil side. It's kind of dreamy. The colors are a bit more muted, well, also because I used watercolor on toned paper, but generally watercolor tends to be softer. And the pine needles look a lot softer. Everything is somehow squishier. There's this sense of space here. Again, great look if that's what you want, but you may not. You may prefer the sharper, highly stylized image. And of course, for the star of the show, the glowing lights effect. Very simple, but life-changing. Use pure white for the bulbs themselves. Make sure to kill the outlines completely and use a nice soft gradient of any color around the bulb. So give it a shot. Since the filming of this video, a lot has changed. I now run my own private academy. It's easy to draw, so all the new links to everything are in the video description. As always, if you enjoy what I do, please remember to give this video the thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and please do consider becoming a patron. Thank you so much for watching. Please do try this effect out, share your work. I can't wait to see what you create, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!